everybody, welcome. Thanks for being here, number one. Welcome to Adweek, and thank you to Adweek for having Andrew and I here to talk to you today. So we'll take a moment to introduce ourselves. My name is Emily Henderson. I'm the head of media at Google in EMEA. So I lead a team called the Media Lab, which manages all of Google's strategy, buying, planning, activation for our media campaigns in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. I think some of my teammates are here today, so hello guys. Thanks for being here. And Andrew, I've known Andrew for a long time.
We stopped counting, haven't we?
I think it's over 8 years, so I think once you get to 10, maybe you stop counting.
Hi everybody, I'm Andrew. About 15 years ago, something like that, I co-founded an agency called Essence. And we're fortunate enough to have been partnered with Google for the last 13 years. And I've been working very closely between the two companies for all that time. It's a landscape that's shifted enormously during the time I've been lucky enough to work with these amazing colleagues and clients. And I'm excited to share some of that with you today.
Yeah, it's nice because Andrew and I are often out doing our daily thing. We don't get to cross paths that often, and this is a nice opportunity to get together and hopefully share something that's interesting and maybe a bit practical with you guys as well. So we're here to talk about advertising in the intelligent era. That implies that there's been a non-intelligent era before this. I'm not sure if that's correct, but advertising in the intelligent era is the title of the talk. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, which certainly, as mentioned, are two pretty substantial topics in the world and in the industry today. But we want to make it real and make it practical for you guys, and we think that that's not always something that's happening in the world of marketing. From a Google perspective, so just taking my Google marketer hat off for a second, we've become an AI company over the last 5 years. So we made a big pivot a few years ago to begin to build AI, machine learning, into all of our products and services. And that's been really key for us. It's allowed us to develop products that are way more helpful, way more relevant to consumers. So the Google Assistant being one prime example of that. It's using natural language recognition to be able to understand what someone's asking it, not just the words that someone is saying, but what someone actually means when they're asking a question, asking for help. Google Assistant wouldn't exist without AI and machine learning built into its core. Similarly, things like Google Photos. Google Photos is a pretty awesome app if you're not using it. So if you are on your phone, you're looking for photos from last weekend, if you were at a party, or photos of your dog at the beach. Those are things that without something like Google Photos, you kind of have to scroll through and take a lot of time to go back and find those things that you were taking pictures of. But Google Photos uses machine learning to assess those photos and understand what's in the photo itself and categorize them based on the things that you are likely to search for. So when you go into the app and search for photos of my dog at the beach, Google Photos will bring that up for you. And it's a nice, beneficial and helpful thing. Google Cloud as well. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the various products that exist in Google Cloud, but certainly from a business perspective, Google Cloud has a suite of tools available to people across all industries, all types of business that can be used to bring machine learning into the work that you're doing. And so Andrew and I are going to give some examples of that today. So from a product perspective, we are doing some great work as a company, but I think from a marketing perspective, it's often less clear how to bring machine learning into what we do. It's something that from just thinking about what marketing is, it's human-to-human communication. And so being able to use machine learning in a way that is smart and additive and actually making our campaigns better isn't necessarily easy. And so we want to avoid being like this robot ketchup squeezer on the screen when we do marketing and actually use things like machine learning in a positive way.
And unless you've been living under a rock for the last 4 or 5 years, you'll be aware that that's not always straightforward. We've seen this technology have immense benefit to people, and Emily's given some examples of that, but we've also seen some pretty nefarious effects. And those are pretty wide-ranging, right? So if you think back about 5 years ago, I think probably the filter bubble phenomenon was the tip of the iceberg as I think about how the world has evolved its thinking around, the impacts of machine learning in media and in content. And in some ways, it would have, with retrospect, was quite easy to see coming that filter bubbles would transform into maybe echo chambers, which would give rise to things like facilitation of extremist content, to things like content spirals that we've seen in social media and video platforms, that would give rise to some of the issues that we've seen in elections, in obviously here in this country, obviously in other countries around the world. And that we've also seen more recently, perhaps, algorithmic bias really becoming a very, very prevalent issue. And particularly, we're seeing now gender and racial bias creeping into algorithms, even from some of the most advanced companies in the world. We've seen Amazon and LinkedIn manifestly affected by this in their recruitment. Now, generally, I'd say these algorithms are not to blame. They are just doing what they're programmed to do. But that's a very cheap excuse. The truth is they're being fed relatively poor information sometimes. Often they're being fed pre-existing biases and they are aping those. Often they are being given poor objectives and they are seeking those out. And those are difficult things to manage and to police. And these problems are not specific to advertising. The easiest example of the ethical dilemmas that are presented by this kind of technology are in the world of the self-driving car. And I'm sure you've all heard the thought experiment of the self-driving car that has to decide whether it wants to kill a young child or an elderly couple when it's faced with an impossible choice like that. And the problem is that those are ultimately ethical choices which even humanity struggles with, so it's very difficult to write code to answer all of those questions. And when we think into these advanced questions of social utility, machines have just the same kind of headaches that we do, but it's very difficult to write code that answers them. And advertising isn't the most important of those dilemmas, but I contend that it will be the first industry to confront these dilemmas head on, because all we do is words and pictures. And actually words and pictures are quite easy to create and manipulate. And then we've seen that really with the fake news phenomenon. And we see that in much more simple terms. We see that with runaway retargeting. Like, who hasn't heard when we've told our families what we do that they're sick of being followed around the internet by repetitive and annoying ads? That's really was, in some ways, the beginning of these problems, these headaches, as we think about the media ecosystem, but it's absolutely not the end. And what I find quite frightening is that even seemingly completely innocuous combinations of audiences and products and context can be put together. They're individually fine and totally brand safe, but can be put together to create some really, really frightening problems that can do societal harm. And particularly when algorithms target performance that is surfaced in some of the most vulnerable parts of society, and we try and push products that potentially have addictive or compulsive properties, whether those are foods, whether they are drink, whether they are gambling, or whether there are things that to you and me might seem perfectly safe, but to others are incredibly frightening. I think we have to be incredibly responsible and thoughtful about how we apply this technology in advertising, and that requires us as an industry to work really hard. Not because advertising is the most important application of machine learning, because I think it will be the fastest to rise to become a commonplace, and in fact, it already has. But the good news is, the silver lining, is that I think if we do that right, we have the opportunity to fix advertising. There is, I kind of feel, a bit of a crisis in our industry. I think of advertising as a kind of a three-legged stool, as a bit of a contract between advertisers, the brands that many of you work with, publishers, who ultimately have to earn a crust from this business, and audiences who have to put up with the ads that we put into the world and hopefully even enjoy them. And I think that contract, that economic balance, has been breaking down over the last decade or so. I think as advertisers have been empowered to make more choices, they're rejecting advertising. They're either walking away from it, they're blocking it, they're skipping it. They're saying they've had enough. And increasingly we're seeing them take more control of their personal data, more control of their advertising choices. Mm-hmm. I think that in some ways is a good thing, because it exerts some pressure on the system. But the system can't quite take that pressure right now. We've got publishers that are going out of business, we've got great editorial brands that are reduced to hosting clickbait on their sites to try and generate yield that keeps them in business while they're having to lay off staff. And advertisers aren't winning either. Right? We're seeing reduced marketing effectiveness reported from the buy side. And we're seeing lots of questions about ROI and lots of these big companies that often fund large-scale advertising struggling for growth in the low single digits. I believe this technology has the ability to rebalance that equation, to fix the three-legged stool, to do that by through more respectful advertising that thinks much harder about the audience so that they don't have to reject it, that listens to their preferences, that responds to their needs, and that doesn't just annoy them, that earns better yield for publishers so that they can create great editorial content that we really care about being associated with, and that drives returns for brands by cutting waste. So I think this is our shot at redemption. But with all of that risk that I just spoke about, it's all about our ability to create the right rules, the right guardrails, to set the right objectives for this technology and use it responsibly as marketers.
Yeah. Well, we agree as a company. So I think when we have thought about this as a marketing team, we've had some good guidance in this from Sundar Pichai, who's our CEO, about a year ago published Google's AI principles, which lay out sort of our philosophy on how AI and machine learning should be used from a company perspective. And I think the way that Sundar's vision is written, it's written very much from a product development perspective. And there's a lot in there that can apply to marketing, and I encourage anyone who is working in the space to have a look at that and have a read through. There's elements in there around only using machine learning, only using AI in instances where it adds value, where it's beneficial to society, where it does no harm. And I think those principles are good guidance for us. So when we think about ads and how words and pictures come to life in our communications, how can we bring those principles to life in that sense? And we've done some work to get started. So I think when we think about machine learning and technology, one of the initial ways that we thought to begin to use this across our campaigns is probably an area that you might expect, and that's in bidding and impression selection optimization. So more on the performance digital side of things. I want to give a shout out to Bob Arnold, one of my teammates in the US, and Claudia Rowe, one of our teammates here in EMEA, who've been doing some amazing work in this space alongside members of Andrew's team, where they've taken tools from Google Cloud like TensorFlow and are using that to apply to customize the way that we bid for impressions across our campaigns. We're doing this on both performance goals as well as brand goals. In many cases, this is helping us deliver more effective campaigns. It's also helping our publishing partners. So one of the things that we've seen is that these tools can help us identify higher quality impressions and win for those impressions. And that's often shifting budget to partners like The Guardian, for example, which, from a pure performance CPM perspective, it's not the cheapest inventory, but it's high quality and it performs for us, and the algorithm helps us recognize that in real time.
Emily, you were going to tell us that this is all about better stories and more inspiring storytelling, and now we're already into programmatic bid optimization.
I know, Andrew, it's coming. Don't worry. So on that side, one of the things that's important for us as a company is to tell stories about our products in a way that's super relevant and meaningful and contextual. Google Home is a great example of that. When you're in the kitchen trying to cook a meal, you've got flour all over your hands. That's sort of the perfect moment to talk to someone about how you can use Google Home and the assistant embedded within Google Home to ask for the next ingredient in the recipe or the next step in the recipe. Similarly with things like the assistant, if you're out in London on a Friday night, being able to see how the assistant can help you find bars nearby or find your way home when the night tube is partially on. Things like that are really helpful, and that's, for us, that's how we think marketing should work. It should be meaningful and not just spamming people, but giving them helpful content in the moment. So we have done some work in this space already, again in partnership with Andrew's team. We've had a series of dynamic ads which we've launched in previous years, which have taken a lot of this information and built it into the ad unit so that we can, with some limitations, understand what the right message is to deliver to a person at a moment in time. Called this execution the Magic Banner. This is something that we've been running for a couple of years. It takes into account things like location, time of day, weather. It knows if you're in London, in Soho on a Friday night out at the bars. It knows if it's a Monday morning and it's raining and you're on your way to work and you might want to know that the assistant can give you a message about remember to bring an umbrella. So helpful information when you need it. And we've seen great performance from these ads. So we typically see significantly higher performance in terms of brand lift, understanding of the product's features, and that's sort of the big challenge for us as a company is people know Google and people know generally what Google is, but they don't know all of the things that our products can do. And so that being in that moment is super, super helpful. But it's not as seamless and fluid as it seems. So behind the scenes of making these ads is basically a sausage factory of people, much like our friends at Seinfeld, who are behind the scenes powering these dynamic ads, even though they're feed and database, powering them with tons of man hours, tons of manual checking of copy, tons of programming, and there's still limitations to how contextual these ads and how smart they can really be. And in some ways that's right. Like these ads are using data that is often tied to a person and what that person is doing in the moment. And so, of course there are ethical and legal limitations to that, and there should be. And so we thought, can we come up with a way to continue to be dynamic and continue to be personal, continue to be respectful of users' data, but deliver something that's even more helpful and more meaningful and more effective than these ads have been in the past.
So there I was, minding my own business, grinding the meat in the sausage factory, and I got an email like this.
It wasn't exactly like this,
It was exactly like this. might have actually been a bit meaner than this. But broadly speaking, no, it's true. I'm being unfair. The crux of the challenge was to deliver a level of contextual relevance that was above and beyond what we were already incredibly proud of having achieved with the Magic Banner. I think the phrase might have been, "Where's the next Magic Banner? What's beyond Magic?" And I think we haven't answered that question fully, but we do have some beginnings of an idea that we want to share with you, and we're really, really excited about the direction this work is taking. So we started by bringing together a really diverse group of people. And this is a photo from a hackathon that was actually graciously hosted by Google with their cloud team. So we had cloud engineers from Google involved. We had Essence engineering teams. We had Essence creatives. We had Essence media planners and investment professionals all involved in this session. And we had our clients involved directly because they understood the use cases that would bring the product to life in the most interesting ways. And that's a really different beginning to a creative process, right? So we're really pleased that that's how we started. We're thinking about different ways to, I guess, make a version of that ad that you saw, the video spot that you saw bringing Google Home to life in the kitchen, to life in lots of contexts that would illustrate the product magic and feel really, really additive. And quite quickly we realized that we also needed context at the table. And we invited our friends from The Guardian to join us in that conversation really early because we knew that the environments we wanted to illustrate the product in were many of the editorial content categories that they're so strong in. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about recipes. Emily mentioned the importance of the kitchen as a place for home assistance. And obviously The Guardian has a phenomenal recipe section. And we thought very quickly what we could do is to show the assistant recommending dishes that would accompany the recipe that you were looking at on the site. And if you think about how you'd normally do that, well, you'd probably build some keyword lists, right? So you'd think, let's just say, I'll have a bunch of dishes that I can identify as sweet, and I'll recommend accompaniments or sides for a pudding and some savory keywords. So for pancakes, puddings, tarts or flans, you might think of a sauce or an ice cream or something like that. And you'd build ads that would be tailored to each of those keyword lists. And this is a pretty advanced partnership where you've got access to page content. That's a pretty privileged position. And you get to lovely combinations like black pudding with vanilla ice cream. Or how about sunny egg muffins and sprig vegetable tart with hazelnut and chocolate sauce? Or vegan kimchi pancakes with maple syrup?
Doesn't exactly hit the smart part of the brief.
It's a car crash, right? And actually, these sorts of things are really, really hard to avoid because language is difficult to understand, and it's very difficult to explain to an algorithm why that dish wouldn't go well with maple syrup. Until you think differently about this problem, and instead of trying to create rules, try to create some intelligent models that can actually have the power to make inferences. And here we used a really powerful tool as part of the Google Cloud Platform suite called AutoML. AutoML, I would encourage any of you in this room to play with it. You don't have to have any coding ability whatsoever to experiment with AutoML. In this case, we fed the AutoML tool about 250 images of sweet and savory foods to train the model to recognize dishes that would fall into each of those camps. And all you have to do is manually label these, so that, it was a bit of a boring afternoon for someone in the office, but once you've done that, you've got your own proprietary predictive model that predicts whether a dish is sweet or savory. And then you can do things like this. This vegetable tart has got vegetables in it, and the algorithm recognizes that tarts that have vegetables in them tend to be savory. And just by looking at the image, there's no copy analysis involved here. So with 99.99999% certainty, this is a savory dish. And I now know that I should accompany that recipe with a conversation about the main course or a side dish that would go well with that. And that allows me to start creating ads like this one. So this ad was not pre-built. The recipe for it was designed by a creative, but ultimately this ad is being assembled on the fly through entirely machine learning derived copy. So we've analyzed that image. We reckon that's definitely a sweet dish. We've deciphered the copy and recognized that the recipe that's being built here is for a lemon and ginger friand, whatever that is. And we can also analyze that text and extract the fact that the key ingredient in this recipe is ginger. So we haven't given any logic to do that. It's just figured out. Ginger is important. And so we're able to say, why not add that to my shopping list? And this works really well. It scales extremely well. So we can replicate this on hundreds and hundreds of recipes, thousands of recipes, in fact. And we don't have to pre-screen every set of ad copy because we have very high confidence in the algorithm's ability. And we're even confident enough that we can start creating some quite playful executions. So those are all a little bit prescriptive. But here's one that takes a long time to cook. And we might say, well, if the prep time is 3 hours, actually, maybe instead of cooking anything at home, I'll just order a pizza. And you can get quite playful with this, right? It doesn't have to be just boring old dynamic ads. It's not just recipes either. So here's a good example for the travel section. Here's an article which is obviously to anyone in this room about visiting the city of Nashville, Tennessee. Right? But if you look at the keywords on this page, actually the most common are country music. If you extract out all the pronouns and stuff. This is not an article about country music. It would be inappropriate to talk about music in this context. On the other hand, if you use Google's natural language processing API, again through Google Cloud, it's an equally simple tool to use, and you feed the content of this article through it, it will immediately highlight that by a factor of 6, the most important term in this article is Nashville. And that kind of analysis gives us the confidence to talk about other features of the Google Assistant. So translation, for example. In this case, we figured out that, well, Mexico City, surprise, surprise, is in Mexico. And in Mexico, they don't speak Mexican, they speak Spanish. And again, these are really, really easy inferences for us to make and with confidence without the risk of making big mistakes. Currency conversion is another really simple example. All of these are being assembled through inference, not rules. And it's not just ads. So we're really excited that these tools are beginning to allow us to create experiences beyond traditional ad formats that have that kind of magic quality to them. And this is one of those partnerships. This was a piece of work we did in the US, obviously, featuring the CBS Fantasy Football League. And effectively, we built a virtual pundit in the Google Assistant. And you could ask this virtual pundit which players you should draft, who you should trade. And And in fact, as part of the package, the pundit was featured on TV alongside the human pundits. And it wasn't perfect, and it was a little bit funny at points. But this was one of the most popular actions throughout the football season in the assistant. So it was right up there with, hey, play this song, or what's the weather like today? And we're really, really proud because this wasn't an audience base that we'd necessarily spoken to previously. This might feel a bit Google specific, like it's hard probably for other brands to think, how can I build an assistant into assistant? But in fact, that's not the case at all. So you can build your own intelligent assistants, and maybe even easier than that, think about how these models could be trained in service of your own brands and businesses. So if you're a travel company, you could quite easily go through someone's image feed, say their Instagram feed, look at images that they've liked, and recommend locations that feature that kind of environment. If you're a real estate company, allow people to take photos of houses or flats that they love the look of, and recommend others that are for sale that look like that have that same feel. If you're a fashion retailer, create a get the look ad that scrapes the content that someone's enjoying and recommends inventory from your catalog that's in stock, in their size, and conforms to the kind of the fashion sense that they're obviously inspired by. There are so many possibilities, and I think my main guidance here is just try stuff. It's actually really, really easy to use these frameworks. As long as we do so responsibly, I think it creates a new kind of creativity across brands and agencies.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. So before we close, we wanted to leave you guys with 4 takeaways, some of the things that we thought about as we went through this process, and some of the things that are probably important to keep in mind as you also embark on similar types of work within your own companies and your own agencies. So first one is that this type of technology, machine learning, AI, it's for stories, not just for sales. You can see how we approach this, how we sort of began from this place of, well, this is technology that can help us bid better, help us optimize our campaigns in flight, performance. And where it's come to is actually having much broader applications on the creative side of things. So I think, have an open mind, go in, learn about the technology, and see what it can do for you. As Andrew just mentioned, there's tons of different applications if you think about it creatively. It's also a new definition of creative. So super cliche to say this, but the old world of what a creative is long gone. Andrew mentioned the hackathon that we got together with people from the agency, people from our team, people from cloud, lots of different skill sets in the room, everything from creative directors to programmers to data scientists. And that way of working is, we believe that's kind of the new norm. I think to get to a place where we're realizing the opportunity that we have with this technology, those ways of working are what we need to be doing more of. And so encourage everyone to really think outside the box there. And I think push your creative agencies as well to come to the table and do that with you. I think we luckily work with some awesome creative agencies at Google who are really keen to work in this space as well. So kudos there. And partners as well. The Guardian is a big part of that, and it's been a huge part of making this come to life. So develop those close relationships with your publishing partners, bring them to the table early. They have a ton to contribute to these conversations from the start as well.
We completely failed to give a plug to the questions app at the beginning of our talk. So it's there, and we're probably in a lot of trouble. We're going to have a few minutes at the end, so if you've got questions that are burning, please drop them into
you've got about
the thingy.
30 seconds.
We're good. But yeah. I'll string out the last bit. We'd love your questions. I guess if we haven't laboured the point enough, I really just want to emphasize how important it is that this technology is used responsibly and thoughtfully. I think it could be completely squandered by our industry, and it kind of has been to date. I think there are lots of very, very advanced uses of machine learning that are incredibly nefarious, and this technology can be used for fraud, it can be used for vote manipulation, it can be used to make victims of the most vulnerable in society, or it can be used to redeem the advertising ecology and create a new era of sustainability. And that choice is on us. I think, learn about it yourselves, challenge your teams to learn about it, ask questions. Next time you get pitched a black box that magically sells widgets at half the price of what you thought it took to sell a widget before. Question that. Ask how it's being used responsibly, and think really hard about the guardrails that you should put around this technology. I kind of think of it in terms of what are the constraints, what are the degrees of freedom that you want to give to an algorithm, so that it can operate within the framework that it can understand. What you don't want is you don't want to accidentally make choices that relate to variables that are just not fed, that are not available to the algorithm. And set the right goals. So I think that's on all of us, setting goals that are actually meaningful, that make sense to a human being, rather than just, hey, make people hit that tag a million times, and that could easily be misinterpreted.
On the responsibility piece, one of the things I love about the Guardian execution in particular is that it's using way less personal data than is often used in advertising campaigns, right? It's just using the content of the page, and so it's delivering that personalized experience without using individual user data, which is something that I think we should all be pushing more toward.
Certainly in this day and age, it feels very relevant. And then finally, just I hope we've left you with the idea that anyone can play at this. You happen to be hearing about a story by, a Google campaign that leverages a lot of Google technology, but I think any brand can find a role for this technology and can start to gain advantage from it. And I hope we've made that abundantly clear. I think the barrier to entry here is really low. The thing I love the most about Google Cloud Platform is how easy it makes it. There are frameworks that exist on Amazon and Microsoft platforms that do a lot of the things that we've described here as well. GCP is particularly easy to start with, and there are nice front ends to these things. You can literally drag and drop your way to your own machine learning model, and it's a lot of fun learning and experimenting, so please do.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks, guys. So I think we have a few minutes for questions. Okay. Can you see the questions?
I can. Do you want to pick one?
Let's pick one. Let's see. Clients able to bring their own algorithm to Google's platform, fully control all of the coefficients that go into the bid decisioning. I don't have my glasses. Do you expect the technology to change the mix of let's, Andrew, you might want to take the first one, but I can speak to the second one. So the second, can you guys see the questions? Yeah, you can. So I'll speak to the second one. Do you expect this technology to change the mix of agency or client talent, or to reduce the headcount in either? It's a really, really good question. And coming from the agency world prior to Google, certainly one that I can relate to very much, being on that side of the business as well. I think it's already changing the makeup of our teams in terms of the skill sets and the areas of expertise that we bring to the table. I think it's happening in a way that is allowing people to sort of branch into new areas and develop new skill sets. I don't think it's been something where all of a sudden we've gone from having a team of marketers or people with digital advertising backgrounds to a team of solely data scientists. I think one of the keys for me is that, and you've seen this with these examples that we shared today, it really does take a diverse set of skills to bring these things to life. So just as you need somebody who can understand how to use the tools in the Google Cloud Platform, use machine learning to build these ads, you also need someone who can think about the clever and creative ways that the communication gets expressed within the ad unit. If these are just sort of robotic, very inhuman types of comms, then the magic of these ads is lost. And so I think, in a way, from a creativist perspective in particular, it's opening up new pathways and new ways to be creative. It's not just making 30-second TV spots anymore. This is a completely new challenge and new brief to a creative. And I think, for me, if I were a creative director, I would find this really interesting and hopefully really fun.
I'm willing to bet that the next question is a setup from someone from Essence, but I'll try. So I think the question of bring your own algorithm and Google's philosophy around bring your own algorithm has been a big question in the market for the last few years. Other DSPs have really led the charge on this kind of idea, and it was AppNexus's kind of, I guess, founding principle that they would create an ecology where this would be the norm. I think the importance of this true kind of completely customizable bidder for most marketers is evolving. I think it was very hip, but I think as we obviously create a more responsible data ecosystem, I think it is right that Google is questioning whether we want to expose that much data as a matter of routine. It is contrary to the spirit of GDPR to pour all of the data that's available out into logs just because we can. And so I think that there is going to be a change. And I think in some ways the fact that you haven't seen Google plow into this head first is probably a good thing, and I think a sign that they've taken this regulation quite seriously. Certainly we've seen Google dip a toe into customizable bidders, and we've obviously shared some of that work today. I think they also recognize, and I can't speak completely for Google products, I'm an external buyer of these services, but I think they recognize that the ecosystem is shifting, and my sense is that the customizable bidder as it was known in 2017 is going to change shape, and that the more walled gardens emerge, the less it's going to be kind of worth doing that kind of work, and the more emphasis is going to be placed on other signals without necessarily having that level of introspection into the auction. In some ways that makes me sad because I kind of enjoy that geeky stuff, but I think in other ways I think that's going to be part of a more respectful privacy ecosystem, which I think the world is tending toward.
Yeah, good. What have we got as well? How much time do we have?
There's a good one at the bottom.
How much publisher access do you require to make this work? Oh, I lost it. Oh, no, there it is. Is this an aspect of content data that publishers will need to make part of their ad platform? Yes, that's a great one. I mentioned the partnership with The Guardian. So we have partnered with The Guardian quite closely over the last couple of years on a number of different areas. I think one has been just working with them from a technology perspective. And so a lot of the tech and expertise that's powering this, it's the things that we've been talking with them about for a number of years now. They are certainly a fantastic publisher in terms of the quality and breadth of content that they're creating as well. And so I think understanding how we can leverage a publisher like that to reach the right audience, and how that content can potentially be used in an example like this. It's super key. We mentioned the hackathon where they were a part of that conversation early on. We've had long-standing conversations. I think this conversation with them started months and months ago as sort of a seed of an idea that I actually think they might have even originally brought to the table. I'm not sure about that, but anyway, there's a, not to discredit.
Joint credit.
But it was a part of ongoing conversations with them about ways that we could build a better advertising experience on their website and create a better experience for their users. That's a common, we want to create an experience that's effective from a marketing perspective. They want to create an experience that is good for their users. That's a common goal between us. And so I think having that partnership and that common goal is really important.
I'd just add that one of the great things about The Guardian is they have a content API that allows us to stay current and to pre-formulate, to basically feed the algorithms in advance to identify these patterns. That's been really helpful, and I generally say to publishers, invest in APIs that help us create more of these kind of bespoke integrations. I think that's really worthwhile. And the big timer is now flashing ominously at us, so I think we're probably out of time, and just to say thank you very, very much for being here.
Guys.